RAF Typhoons punch through the clouds above Lubec Bay. Their orders are urgent. Sink the German liner fleeing north. It is May 1945, and intelligence indicates the Nazi high command is escaping to Norway in a desperate effort to prolong the war. These RAF pilots will put an end to that nonsense. There it is, impossible to miss, 700 feet long, SS Cap Arcona, making for the Skagerrak. They arm their rockets, line up their sights. Elsewhere, Dr. Hans Arnoldsson of the Swedish Red Cross slams open the door to a command briefing, face pale, voice cracking. The liner isn't filled with SS officers or Nazi brass. It is packed, deck to hold, with over 5,000 prisoners evacuated from the Neuengamme concentration camp. And the Typhoons are about to sink her. April 18th, 1945. Berlin burned. Soviet artillery pounded Hitler's capital into rubble while American tanks raced across southern Germany. The Third Reich had weeks, perhaps days, before total collapse. But in Whitehall's war rooms, Winston Churchill saw a different nightmare taking shape. He sent a sobering telegram to Foreign Secretary Eden. It is thought most important that Montgomery should take Lubeck as soon as possible. Our arrival at Lubeck before our Russian friends from Stettin would save a lot of argument later on. The Prime Minister was no longer concerned with defeating Germany. That outcome was inevitable. He was racing to stop Stalin from swallowing Denmark, from turning the Baltic into a Soviet lake. Every hour Montgomery delayed was another hour for the Red Army to surge westward. Then, ultra-intelligence delivered something even worse than Soviet expansion. Intercepted signals revealed SS leadership converging on Flensburg. Himmler, concentration camp commandants, the architects of genocide, gathering like rats, fleeing a sinking ship. They were not planning to surrender. They were planning to run. Air Marshal Conyngham spread the reconnaissance photos across his desk. The Baltic ports teemed with frantic activity. Ships raised steam, convoys formed. The pattern was unmistakable, a massive evacuation north. Fortress Norway. The two words chilled the briefing room. Norway's endless fjords could shelter Nazi remnants for years. Mountain strongholds, hidden submarine pens. The war would not end. It would mutate into something prolonged and poisonous. Guerrilla warfare, while Europe tried to heal. May 2nd brought the confirmation they had dreaded. RAF Mosquitoes photographed two military convoys breaking out of Neustadt, 6 destroyers, U-boats, and massive troop transports churning north through Baltic swells. The clock was ticking. Every ship that reached Norway meant more war, more lives lost, more SS fanatics plotting their return. Wing Commander Christmas scrawled, "Day Order 72 with brutal clarity, destroy enemy transportation on land and sea." At dawn on May 3rd, Typhoon squadrons fueled up across liberated airfields, 8 rockets per aircraft, cannon drums fully loaded. Within hours, they would transform the Baltic into a graveyard. 160 cargo ships would burn before sunset. Pilot David Ince checked his weapons, the final words of the briefing ringing in his ears. Everything points to a final Nazi retreat into a northern redoubt, Fortress Norway. He would stop these monsters from escaping justice, whatever it took. On April 20th, 1945, Paul Weissman counted the days at Neuengamme. British artillery thundered in the distance. Liberation was finally within reach. Then came the order, evacuation. 80 prisoners were packed standing into each railway wagon. The train lurched north toward Lübeck, away from the advancing Allies. By journey's end, 50 had perished. The survivors stumbled onto the platform and saw her, the Cap Arcona, once Germany's proudest ocean liner, the Queen of the South Atlantic. To the prisoners, she represented hope, perhaps a ship to Sweden. Safety, the Red Cross. SS guards drove them up the gangplanks and down through the hatches. The ship's former luxury, tennis courts, ballrooms and first-class cabins were monuments of a lost age. Captain Heinrich Bertram, in a display of utter bravery, outright refused to take the prisoners aboard. He explained to SS Hauptsturmführer Gehrig that his vessel had been built for 1,500 passengers, not 5,000 prisoners. Goering pointed his Luger at his head to illustrate what the consequences of refusing to ship the prisoners would be. The prisoners were segregated by nationality. Russians and Poles were sent into the banana storage holds below the waterline. Western prisoners, French, Belgian and Dutch, were crammed into the upper decks. Benjamin Jacobs gripped his brother Josik's hand as they descended into darkness. Another prisoner named Paul Weissman would never forget. The overcrowding was such that no one had room to stretch out. Especially catastrophic were the conditions in the lower holds. A finger-thick piece of bread, salt water that burned their throats, no sanitation, no medical care. Men stood pressed against one another in the darkness, some for days. The ship remained at anchor, her engines barely running, while more and more prisoners arrived. Thielbeck sat nearby. So did Deutschland. A flotilla of suffering hid in plain sight. Sam Pivnik managed to reach the deck for air and saw the unthinkable. Dozens of bodies in the water. They had been thrown overboard. May 3rd dawned grey over Lubec Bay. Another day of waiting. Surviving hour by hour in the belly of a dying ship. Another day of hearing the splash of those who didn't make it through the night as they hit the water. Then came the distant drone that grew louder. Aircraft engines. Prisoners who could reach portholes pressed their faces to the glass. British planes, the RAF. Their liberators had found them at last. Some began to sob with relief. Others managed weak cheers. The Typhoons circled once, twice. On the Cap Arcona's deck, a few prisoners waved whatever white cloth they could find. Surely the pilots could see them. 24 hours earlier, Paul de Blonay, Swiss delegate of the International Red Cross, intercepted Major General Pip Roberts as British tanks rolled into Lubeck. General, there are 7,000 to 8,000 prisoners on ships in the bay. Concentration camp survivors. Roberts didn't hesitate. He radioed the message from his armored car, watching de Blonay's face to ensure every detail was transmitted correctly. The message entered the chain of command. Somewhere between Roberts' radio and the airfields, it vanished into the fog of war. Dawn, May 3rd. Dr. Hans Arnoldsson of the Swedish Red Cross pounded on doors at British headquarters. He'd spent days trying to save prisoners from the ships. Now he delivered the same warning. Concentration camp inmates were packed aboard the Cap Arcona, the Thielbeck, and the Deutschland. The British officers promised immediate action. Too late. At airfields across northern Germany, Typhoon squadrons were already warming engines. At 2 p.m., squadron leader Johnny Baldwin led 198 Squadron into crystal-clear skies. 9 Typhoons armed with 60-pound rockets and cannons. Their briefing had been unambiguous. Nazi leadership is trying to flee to Norway. Destroy all shipping in Lubec Bay. Below them, the targets materialized through broken clouds. The Cap Arcona sat like a beached whale. Pilot Lawrence Stark noticed something odd. They did not have steam up, but there was no time to question orders. The attack run had begun. Baldwin's Typhoon screamed down at 400 miles per hour. At 3,000 feet, he armed his rockets. 4 streaked toward the Cap Arcona, trailing white smoke. They punched through the deck between the funnels and exploded in the accommodation areas. In the hold, Benjamin Jacobs felt the ship convulse. The storeroom rocked back and forth. There was a second explosion, then a third. Prisoners looked up in confusion. Martin Rumbold's 263 Squadron followed, then 197, then 193. Rockets and cannon fire raked the ship from stem to stern. The Lubec took direct hits below the waterline. The Deutschland burned. Above deck, Sam Pivnik watched hell unfold. Thick grey smoke was belching from the area below. Fire raced through the wooden partitions. Stairways became flaming chimneys. In London, a duty officer would later admit to investigators a message was received on May 2, 1945, that these ships were loaded with KZ prisoners, but by some oversight, the message was never passed on. The Cap Arcona listed to starboard. Her superstructure had become a floating oven. SS guards, equipped with hidden life jackets, shoved prisoners aside and leaped into the frigid Baltic. The prisoners, locked below, weakened by starvation, faced a terrible choice: burn or drown. Those who reached the deck found the lifeboats ablaze, the davits twisted by rocket strikes. Benjamin Jacobs watched men jump anyway, preferring the 45-degree water to the flames. They hit the surface and never came up, their skeletal bodies no match for the cold. German trawlers circled the wreckage like vultures. They pulled SS men from the water, 400 guards, 20 SS women, and 16 sailors. When prisoners swam toward the boats, guards beat them back with oars or shot them. Sam Pivnik clung to wreckage as bullets cracked past his head. Now and again, there were bursts of pistol and machine gun fire as those in the boats scattered prisoners trying to board them. Above, RAF pilot Alan Wise banked for another pass. He was ordered to allow no Nazis to escape. We used our cannon fire at the chaps in the water. We shot them up with 20mm cannons in the water. Horrible thing, but we were told to do it, and we did it. That's war. At 6 p.m., the Cap Arcona's fuel tanks detonated. The Grand Liner rolled onto her side and settled in the shallow bay, her hull breaking the surface like a steel reef. Of 5,000 prisoners aboard, only 350 survived. The Lubec had already vanished beneath the waves. 2,750 souls lost, 50 survived. On the beach at Neustadt, British commandos found a scene from hell. 500 bodies lined the sand. Major Noel Till would write, in his official report, "In view of the grievance held by survivors, it is strongly urged that an official inquiry be held." There never was one. Among the chaos on the beach, Eva Neurath searched frantically. Her husband, Willy, a political prisoner, had been on the Cap Arcona. She called his name until her voice cracked. Then, impossibly, Moppel, his pet name for her. Willy emerged from a group of survivors, burned but alive. For weeks, bodies washed ashore at Neustadt, Scharbeutz, and Timmendorfer Strand. Mass graves filled. Bone remains appeared for decades. The last surfaced in 1971. In the files of British intelligence, the truth waited. They had known. The warnings had been sent. By oversight, by chaos, by the terrible arithmetic of war's final hours, 7,000 prisoners fell one step away from freedom, at the hands of those meant to free them from their plight.